All right, we're going live on this edition of the DV Show podcast. Thanks for joining us. We had a little technical difficulty there earlier. Not able to connect through Skype. So our guest is actually being passionate and driving home away from his office because his office lost internet access. Isn't that crazy? So now we're going to go live in a couple of minutes with Bradley Olsen, who is the producer of Off the Tracks. This is a powerful documentary about how the video industry was affected by the introduction to Final Cut Pro X. Crazy, crazy stuff going on. So while we wait for Bradley, let's actually show the trailer. This is the trailer of our guest that we're going to have on the show.
I started using Final Cut Pro 10 on the day it was released. And I did the thing everybody did, is open it up, go, oh my God, and shut it back down again.
Oh God, what is this?
What the hell?
This can be really cool, and I really hate it.
I could go from here to here and be okay, and from here to here and be okay, and then from 7 to Final Cut 10, I'm like, why don't I understand this?
Apple didn't help themselves by saying we're no longer supporting Final Cut 7. We're doing a hard cut from Final Cut 7 to Final Cut 10, and they probably should have done a dissolve.
I remember it coming out and there being this big kerfuffle. It actually had turned into good press for me because they've done something so huge here that it's pissing a lot of people off, so I'm automatically interested.
Here was a group of people that were willing to take risks on pretty much every level and essentially start over after they had really conquered quite a bit of territory.
I love that they said, let's reinvent. Let's look at where things are going with digital media, and let's reinvent the editing paradigm based on where we think things are going.
And people really focused on that. People should have been paying attention, but for some reason, a whole lot of people got really emotional and didn't look back, which is a big shame.
I'm sad that people hate Final Cut 10, and I'm sad that the people who love Final Cut 10 feel like they're oppressed. I just want us all to get over it.
I think they found it personally threatening because they didn't actually know what they were. And if you're a storyteller, it doesn't matter what kind of software you use.
The skill of storytelling using video is becoming something that everybody needs to be able to do.
That's what Final Cut 10 makes possible. It's a tool that we can use today to tell the stories that need to be told to enable our society to move forward.
Every human being has got at least one beautiful story in their soul, and it would be nice to give them the strength and the ability to express it. We have that now with Final Cut 10.
Today, you have very little excuse not to make a film if you really want to make a film.
The mechanics of editing have kind of gone away, and it really now comes down to storytelling. Making it easier for somebody to tell a story means that we get to see more of those stories, which I think is really cool.
Change is radical, and we're waiting for the producer of this movie to come on the DV Show podcast right now. He had some technical difficulties, unfortunately, and it always happens on the DV Show. It's kind of crazy, but that's okay. We're here, and we're here now. Well, that was a trailer for the DV Show, and actually, that was a trailer for the movie, and Bradley Olsen's about to come on the DV Show podcast. We had some technical difficulties, and he drove all the way home. He drove all the way home to be on the show to talk about this amazing movie. The trailer looks incredible. I've seen many of them on YouTube, and looks pretty good. And our guest today is Bradley Olsen, the producer of this film, and which is getting quite the backing on Kickstarter. So it's pretty good stuff. All right, so he's getting set up now. I'm getting some text messages from him to get back on the show. Here he is. Wow. What are the chances of that happening, huh?
Well, and as soon as I heard somebody in the office next door yell out, "No!" I was like, oh, great. It's not just me. It's not my router. It's this interruption was brought to you by Comcast Business Cable, by the way. There's a shout out for them. Well, I live close to my office, and I actually thought at first, okay, I can hop in. So
None of us are. None of us are. None of us are. All right, so we were actually watching your. Let me give our audience a little background on what this is all about, because this was brand new to me. I found you on Creative Cow forums, and then it kind of went from there.
Okay.
And I'm a frequent guy now on Creative Cow forums, and it's kind of cool. Noah Cadner was on the show years and years ago, and that's how I kind of picked it up. He put a post up. So let me kind of run through the audience here. As a brand makes me cringe. It was a huge disruption and a change that really is still being felt today. Way back, I was. I'm going to show a picture right now on this live broadcast of me with every single verse. 2011. I'm telling you, it was crazy. So I can associate with all of these people that you have in the introduction of your trailer. Like, what the hell, right? What the hell? So
pretty much.
So with all this misinformation, okay, everyone's feeling the pain of this. Your film, your movie, Off the Tracks, is basically a documentary that aims to clear the air once and for all. And it features all of these cool interviews with creative professionals who use the software and developers who created it. So let me ask you, Bradley, why the hell did Apple make Final Cut Pro X? Do you know the answer to this? Do you know why they did this?
I have some insight on that, actually.
Okay, good.
I mean, that's one of the big questions was trying to address. I think if you looked at the marketing early on, they obviously were saying this is the future of editing, but that's one thing for a big company to come out and say, here's our message. It's another thing for you to really believe, well, what was your real intention for this? Are you saying the professional market is not profitable enough, so you're going after prosumers? I think that's how a lot of people felt, like what they thought Apple was actually doing. And to some degree, that might be right, in the sense that there is a much bigger, broader market outside of high-end film and television. In Hollywood, there's a huge market of people, and we're seeing it even more now with YouTube and online video and Facebook video and things like that. There's a lot of people who have stories they want to tell, and a tool that makes it easier is going to be purchased by more people. So money could be a motivation, but I think the technical reasons why are a little more interesting, in the sense that if you remember, Final Cut Pro was built off really old code in the 90s.
Yes.
It was built off what they call it Carbon, I believe is the language that it was built off of, which was a 32-bit coding language. And Apple in I think around 2006 or maybe a little earlier had said, oh, we're going to move Carbon up to 64-bit. And then a year later, they said, never mind, we're just kidding. You have to rewrite all your applications if you want them to work in 64-bit on the Mac. And that kind of meant that around that time, we're looking at Final Cut Pro 5, and Final Cut Pro 6. And around that time, there's that big question of, well, what, we're going to have to rewrite Final Cut Pro. And my understanding is there actually was a 64-bit version in development that looked very. We're not doing that. The Apple way is to kind of rethink things, right?
Yes.
If you're going to take the time to write in 64-bit, then I want you guys to rethink editing. And there's a lot of questions. Is like moving forward, do we need these film and tape metaphors in our software? Do we need to cater to that moving forward, or should we be embracing what was coming before Final Cut Pro 10 was things like DSLR filmmaking, and now we've got mobile filmmaking starting to take off, and everything, whether you're shooting on an Alexa or an iPhone, it's all file based.
Right.
So how do you rethink the software for that? And then at the same time, Randy Ubilos, this is kind of running in parallel. He actually moved off of the Final Cut Pro team to work on iMovie. And the reason why he started iMovie was because basically he'd come back from a big underwater footage, and they were looking for shots of sharks.
Nice.
And so he would load it in Final Cut Pro Classic, and he'd double click and it opens up in your viewer, and he's scrubbing through, and it's just like a really slow way, clip by clip, like trying to find shots of sharks. So in his head, he was like, wouldn't it be better if we had film strips. And if I could just hover my mouse over it and I could just skim through the footage, and then I could just select the range like I'm selecting text. And so he kind of worked on that, had somebody help them spruce it up, and they showed it to Steve Jobs, and Steve Jobs said, well, we need a new version of iMovie, so let's just make this the new version of iMovie. What was fascinating is that actually got not as much backlash because consumers aren't as loud as professionals who depend on tools for a living.
That's right.
But that got a lot of backlash when they switched over, because then they started over. They didn't have all the features, and so it was like a familiar story. But iMovie, now what I would say is way better than what the old iMovie was. And for me personally, I think Final Cut Pro 10 has done a similar thing in that it's taken some of those ideas that you could have never done. You could have never added those things in their fullest to Final Cut Pro Classic, if you'd been building off that paradigm.
Yes.
So in order to starting over allowed them to push the software into new directions that they couldn't have.
All right. So
make it better.
So a couple of things come to mind here. Should we hate Randy for one?
He wasn't the only one.
No, he wasn't. He was part of a team, I'm sure. So way back in 2011, I was part of this. We were doing a podcast at the time, and what was really neat was in one of your trailers, I think for the Kickstarter, and we'll talk about that later. In the Kickstarter, you actually used a screenshot from our website that iMovie Pro dazzles the professionals, and which was pretty cool to see. And thank you for doing that. That was really neat. And so we were really mad. And it was, I started calling it iMovie Pro. We get thousands and thousands of comments, did podcasts on it. It was a big, giant uproar. Does your documentary kind of lean towards the fact that, hey, I'm mad, bring it back, or this is okay, let's just kind of deal with it now? So we really shouldn't be mad at Randy. We should be glad. I'm kind of trying to feel for what the documentary really is about.
Well, full disclaimer, make the case for it. That being said, I have, on the side of the fence that I've been on, where it's like, hey guys, no, this is really good, and everybody's like, shut up, it's crap. You don't know what you're talking about. No professionals use it. I've been. That's kind of interesting about the timing of making this documentary.
Yes.
And I feel like most of us who are reasonable have we've let out our steam and we've kind of calmed down. And through that, I've been able to actually, what are some actual real pain points? What are the, aside from the emotional, I don't want to learn something new, what are the things that concern people about this software? So I came up with kind of 6 different topics or areas that I thought were legitimate reasons to have concerns about Final Cut Pro 10 and say, let's talk about this with a level head, and let's make the case for
yes. I mean, because
why or why not. Some of these things don't have clear-cut answers. Like, should Final Cut Pro 10 be aiming for high-end professionals? There's a lot of disagreement amongst the Final Cut 10 community about that.
That's right. I mean, what's a video professional today? I mean, really, there's a whole controversy and whole discussion on that, because everything is just, I was a video professional back in the day, and most of the people that, are on Creative Cow, most of the, the network that go to NAB, what is a video professional today? That definition, it's kind of sketchy, so Pro X is great software. It was difficult, and we're passionate as creative people, so we were kind of upset that this software totally changed. And now that you're talking about, you kind of give me more of insight to say, okay, this is software. This is a computer that deals with this software, and it's going to change. It needs to be compatible. So a big, incompatibility issue arose, and then, he wanted to make it software that would be usable for a larger audience. So it makes sense, but it's still kind of, with me, I was so used with Final Cut Pro, the earlier versions, and got used to it, and I can associate with that guy in your trailer. It was like, what the hell? But anyway, what prompted you to do this project, and how did you get involved with starting this film?
Yeah, definitely a lot of the fact that I had been using it. A little bit about me is I started kind of my video career doing an internship in 2001 at a local video production place, and they were using Avids. And I thought Avids were really cool. At home, I had a really clunky version of Premiere that crashed a lot. And I used an Avid, and I thought, this is amazing. And they said, it's $80,000. So you'll never own one. You just rent them, and maybe someday you'll be lucky enough to run a business and have some Avids. When I saw Final Cut Pro Classic, it was like, holy crap, this is so much more affordable. I can get this software. And then in 2011, I was actually ready for a change. So maybe everybody else wasn't, and everybody else was humming along great. But I noticed that Final Cut Pro was not 64-bit, and I saw I did see the ideas in iMovie. So I actually was open to the change. But I'll admit, when they launched it, it was like, really? Like, it's missing so much stuff. You thought this was ready to replace Final Cut Pro 7? I could see you running this in parallel for 6 months. Sorry, I'm wheezing from running.
I know. I can tell. Take a breath. Have a drink.
Yeah. I'm like, yeah. So anyway.
You actually ran? You actually ran from work to home?
I actually ran down the street. So I'm like, as I'm talking, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm wheezing. I have slight asthma. So
you're awesome.
Anyway,
love it.
So anyway, what was the point I was making? Oh, so I actually was very intrigued by Final Cut Pro 10 when it came out, and the upgrade from 7. I thought these were kind of bonehead moves by Apple.
Yes.
To kind of force that on us, but I paid attention and I learned it because there was some cool stuff. Then they kept improving it, and today I think they've done a phenomenal job on making this thing a fully capable editor. But there were a whole group of people who got turned off, stopped paying attention, and then they started. It reminds me of 10 years ago. I'd hear people say things about the Macintosh, like it can't right click, stuff that hadn't been true for over a decade. But they keep saying this stuff about, the PC versus Mac thing. They keep saying stuff that's not true.
Yeah,
and that's what was happening with Final Cut Pro 10. And because it was my choice, my preference for editing, I cut, by the way, I have Premiere and I have Resolve on my computer, and I cut in all 3 of them. Final Cut Pro 10 is my preference, and people are telling me that I'm crazy for that being my preference. And that I got fed up with that. So I knew there was this community out there, and I said, there's got to be a way to get this message out to everybody. And ultimately, I don't want everybody using the same software. I don't want everybody to just get Final Cut Pro 10 and use that exclusively. I want there to be competition, but I also want the creative artists to be able to choose their tool.
That's right.
And that's something that I definitely don't see happening in Hollywood, where it's 95% Avid.
Yeah.
It's just mandated, and creatives aren't choosing these things. It's just because this is what we've done before. It's a for sure thing, and we don't want to shake the boat. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to try new things.
That's
and
right.
Creative people aren't able to explore different tools. And really, I think that if they were, we could see them reach some sort of maximum potential.
Right. That's right.
Regardless of which tool they like.
I mean, in Hollywood and in small video production houses, change means money. So if you're going to go from one software, if you're going to go from the older version of Final Cut to this new Final Cut Pro X, I know there was a lot of money involved in relearning what you knew, so it costs a lot of money.
Yeah, it's not as bad, I would say, as it would have been in like the 90s or early 2000s, where you were investing, Avids, some Avids, it was like $5,000 a week, and you had somebody come and install it. Final Cut Pro started opening up this thing in terms of just the infrastructure, making that more affordable. And today you can have an iMac that runs all the NLEs. Like that's not right. A problem. Now, in terms of time of somebody learning something new, that might be a challenge. But I mean, I would argue like, well, DPs do it all the time with cameras,
That's right.
and
that's exactly right.
And creative people should be just learning new things. That should be something you budget as part of your time, is to learning new tools and learning new ways of doing things and looking for better ways of doing things. Because if you don't, there's a new generation of kids that are learning to do that.
That's right.
Out of the gate. They're not learning one way to do things and sticking with it. They're trying all different tools. And I think that's where we're going in the future, is people being a little bit more fluid and being more teachable.
That's
I
right.
hope.
So what should people take away from your documentary? I mean, what's your desired outcome from this film?
My desired outcome is that we can get rid of the stigma that Final Cut Pro 10 isn't usable or good software, or that it's, you know, totally foreign and alien. Like I hope that people pride themselves on being storytellers and not just tool users.
Thank you.
I think that's ultimately what I would want people to come out of it, and open up a discussion about new ways of looking at things.
That's awesome. I like that used earlier versions of Final Cut Pro, me included. It was a very complicated software to use, very specialized if you knew a lot about it. And me as an editor at that time, I made a lot of money because I knew a lot about the software and how to do multicam, what most people did not know. So now it kind of opens up the doors. It helps everyone now to be a storyteller. So Brad, I'm curious, what is it about the new version of 10 that makes it the top choice for you? You say that you use other NLEs and you go back to it, but what about it makes it the top choice for you right now? What do you like about it?
So there's definitely a lot of, you know, borrowing of ideas and Resolve and Adobe from Final Cut Pro 10. And I see like I said, again, that's why I like competition, is people kind of copy each other and find their own way to implement a feature. But there's two things that sets Final Cut Pro 10 apart from the competition that I have not seen parodied in any real way. And the first is the way that Final Cut Pro 10 organizes your media, specifically with keyword collections and smart collections. The idea that I can select a range of a clip, and I'm not making a sub clip. I have access to the full clip at any time, but I can sort and filter these things. It's like having a Google search with a really advanced spreadsheet built in, and I can just find things so quickly. And that's just something that, yeah, there's smart bins and things like that, but I've not seen that copied. And then the other thing, which is, I think that part, most people would be like, any editor would be like, oh, that's fantastic. I would love to find my stuff faster. The part that I think upsets people the most now, if they're trying it and they're coming from a traditional system, is the magnetic timeline.
Yes.
That's the thing that it works in reverse of what a track-based timeline does, which it's always in ripple mode, unless you can turn that off. But by default, it's in ripple mode. And so you're always, you know, you can't just pick up and like move a clip down the timeline. You have to use a special modifier key. But that's hard for people to wrap their head around.
It is.
You fight it if you've come from a track-based system. If you haven't, it actually just makes more sense, because you're just putting pictures up, you're putting your shots next to each other and then you're rearranging them at ease.
That's right.
And that becomes really easy to do. So that's the biggest hurdle for people to overcome, but it's actually the thing that I like the most. And this kind of ties back into an earlier question: why Final Cut Pro 10? Why did Apple make this? And why did they get behind a concept like the magnetic timeline? One of the problems that they noticed at Apple was that editors were building these long sequences, and then they would be really afraid at the end, after doing, laying in music and sound effects and titles. They were really afraid of doing a whole lot to the beginning of the sequence, because they were like, this could mess up stuff.
That's right.
Unintentionally, if I'm locking certain tracks. They were having to keep these connections in their heads that really, like this title's supposed to go over this shot, right? This sound effect goes here. The music is supposed to tie in with this scene. And those things were being, you can manage them on tracks, but you have to keep that in your head. And the longer a project gets, the harder it is to remember, and the more likely it is, oh, I screwed up something. So they were like, well, isn't there a way for the computer to do that for me? Like, isn't there a way for the software to actually keep track?
And the magnetic tracks were born
of these vertical relationships.
Yep.
And that's where the inspiration behind the magnetic timeline came from.
That's right.
So now you have a storyline, and now you have stuff that's connected to it. And when you move things around, you manage clip connections, but when you move things around, they can move together.
I hate it.
Now, if you
I hate it, Bradley. I hate it.
If you don't get it, if you don't get used to it, it just feels like I'm smart enough to do this myself. What are you doing? Why are you doing this for me? And you're going to screw things up.
Right. So so is this why the topic that we're talking about now, tracks? Is this how your documentary, how the title came about and how the name came? Really? Okay.
Yeah, it's off the tracks. They got rid of tracks. I mean, now we have audio lanes, and Apple will insist they're not tracks, but they kind of are in a way. But they're they're a little more powerful than tracks, and they can be turned on and off.
Yes.
So, yeah, that, and I think there's a certain amount of craziness to what Apple did. So it's kind of like, oh man, they went off the tracks, like,
and that's how it's how the name came about. Now, when does this documentary become available? And because I just saw the trailer, and you're on Kickstarter. You're like, wow, you've got like backup from Sam Messman, Phil Hodgetts, Richard Taylor, Noah Cadner. You've got a whole bunch of backing, and you're on Kickstarter. So when are we going to see the documentary? When is it going to become available? Is it out now?
So it is not out yet. Okay. I am actually. What was interesting is I had a rough cut put together early this year, and then I randomly got a hold of Randy Ubilos through Facebook, and that kind of I prepared a 15-minute cut that I shared to a private audience at NAB. It was actually at Sam Messman's Faster Together stage. The great response from that 15-minute preview, and then I've been doing this Kickstarter, and as I've been doing that, I've been reshaping my story. So my goal is to have something to show by the Final Cut Pro 10 Creative Summit, which is in October, and that's a gathering of all of us, something there, and based off of how that goes, I want to release it maybe a month or so after that. So I'm still locking down exactly how I'm going to distribute it, but I definitely want to have something available, if not by the end of this year, really early next year. And I want to make it available on as many platforms as I can.
Nice. So what do you? So the film is finished. I mean, what do you need to finish it? Anything, or do you still need a lot to go?
I'm working on getting a lot of B-roll and stock footage and things like that to cover up my talking heads and make it a little more interesting than just people, talking heads. And it's funny you should mention that. I'm actually I'm doing an interview. Somebody is setting up a remote interview this afternoon, and I'm going to Skype in to ask the questions. So I'm actually still doing a few pickup interviews with a few people to include in it. So it is definitely in flux right now, but I've got the overall story shaped, and I've definitely got tons of material to play with at this point.
All right, Brad, thank you for coming on the DV show. We're actually going to close it off here because 30-minute mark. Definitely a lot of content. Okay. We'll put a link to your stuff in the show notes of the podcast. And if anyone has questions, hopefully we can call you back. Call you this time, not on Skype, and we can get you anywhere in the world so you don't have to run back home.
Well, it was that silly office internet. Hopefully it's working when I go back.
It's all good. Well, good luck on your movie. I can't wait to see it. And we're going to put links in the show notes to the podcast, to your Kickstarter, to your website, so everyone can check your stuff out and hopefully contribute and build your film. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
For additional tips, tutorials, and to get your video questions answered, visit thedvshow.com.
Stay on the cutting edge with The DV Show.